The sentence he thought I'd never hear. I wasn't eavesdropping. That's the part people always get wrong. I wasn't hiding behind doors or pressing my ear to walls like some jealous woman desperate for proof. I was simply walking through my own house, the same house I had cleaned, paid for, and filled with 30 years of memories, when the truth drifted toward me like smoke, soft, careless, deadly. She'll never find out. My husband's voice. Low. Confident. Almost amused. I stopped mid-step, one hand still gripping the laundry basket, the other brushing against the hallway wall as if I needed it to stay upright. She trusts me, he continued. Always has. Then a woman laughed. Not a giggle. A laugh that lingered, slow, intimate, practiced. My heart didn't shatter. It froze. I stood there, breathing shallowly, staring at the framed family photos lining the hallway. Birthdays. Vacations. Christmas mornings. All those years smiling beside a man who, at this very moment, was telling another woman that I was foolish enough to be blind. I didn't cry. Not yet. I listened. She's predictable, he said. Routine. Tea at 6. Bed by 10. Same old woman. Same old woman. I felt something inside me shift. Not pain, not rage, but clarity. Because I realized something terrifying and liberating all at once. He didn't just betray me. He underestimated me. I carried the laundry basket back to the bedroom, my hands steady despite the storm quietly forming behind my ribs. I folded shirts with care. Matched socks. Smoothed wrinkles. If he could lie with such ease, then I could wait. That evening, I smiled at him across the dinner table. Passed the salt. Asked about his day. Listened as he talked, words pouring out smoothly, practiced, hollow. I watched the way his phone never left his side. How he stepped outside to take work calls. How his eyes no longer lingered on mine. And suddenly, so many small moments from the past year rearranged themselves into something sharp and undeniable. Late meetings. New passwords. A sudden interest in cologne. I had been faithful. I had been loyal. But I had not been foolish. That night, after he fell asleep beside me, breathing heavy, untroubled, I lay awake staring at the ceiling. I didn't ask questions. I didn't confront him. I didn't scream or beg. Instead, I made a decision that would change everything. If he thought I would never find out, then he had no idea who he married. Because I wasn't going to expose him. I was going to outgrow him. And when the truth finally surfaced, as it always does, it wouldn't be me who looked surprised. It would be him. I didn't confront my husband the next morning. I did something far more dangerous. I started watching. The woman I became in silence. The morning after I overheard him, the house felt different. Not louder. Not colder. Just dishonest. The sunlight came through the kitchen window the same way it always had, catching the dust in the air, warming the wooden table where we'd shared breakfasts for decades. Yet something invisible now sat between us, a truth only I was carrying. He kissed my cheek before leaving for work. Busy day, he said casually, grabbing his keys. I smiled. Drive safe. The door closed behind him, and for the first time in 30 years, I didn't wait for the sound of his car to disappear before letting out a breath. Instead, I sat down. I listened to the quiet. And I began to think. I replayed his words again and again. She'll never find out. Not with anger. With curiosity. How long had he been so sure of my blindness? How long had he mistaken my peace for weakness? I washed the dishes slowly, my hands moving from habit, while my mind worked in ways it hadn't in years. I remembered the early days of our marriage, how he used to ask my opinion on everything. Money. Plans. Decisions. Somewhere along the way, he had stopped asking. And I had stopped insisting. That morning, I did something small but important. I opened a notebook. Not to write accusations. Not to pour out tears. Just facts. Dates. Times. Changes. Patterns. I noticed how often he left the house after dinner to clear his head. How his phone lit up with messages he never opened around me. How he suddenly guarded his wallet, his laptop, his words. I wasn't spying. I was observing. Because when someone underestimates you, they become careless. At the grocery store later that day, I ran into Mrs. Coleman, his co-worker's wife. She chatted easily, unaware she was handing me pieces of a puzzle. "Oh, your husband works so late these days," she said. "That project with her must be exhausting." Her. I smiled politely. "Yes. He's dedicated." She nodded, then frowned slightly. "I met her once. Pretty thing. Very confident." I didn't ask questions. I thanked her and walked away, my heart steady, my steps calm. That evening, I cooked his favorite dinner. Not to please him, but to remind myself who I was. I watched him eat, watched the way he complimented the food without really tasting it. Watched how his eyes drifted back to his phone. Watched how comfortable he was in the lie. And I understood something quietly devastating. He wasn't afraid of losing me. He was certain I would stay. That night, while he slept, I went into the spare room, the one we hadn't used since the kids moved out. I turned on the lamp and opened an old file box. Inside were documents I hadn't touched in years. Accounts. Deeds. Records. Things I had once handled before handing them over to him, to simplify life. I smiled sadly at my younger self. Then I smiled with resolve at the woman I was becoming. I didn't rush. I didn't panic. I began to reclaim. I scheduled appointments. Quietly. I made phone calls. Calmly. I reconnected with people who remembered who I used to be. And with every small step, I felt something return to me. Not anger. Not revenge. Authority. He still believed I was the same woman who trusted blindly. Still believed I wouldn't notice. Still believed I would never find out. And he was right about one thing. I wasn't going to confront him. Because confrontation gives liars time to prepare. I was going to wait. And when the truth finally came out into the light, it wouldn't break me. It would free me. I didn't follow him. I didn't accuse him. Instead, I uncovered something he never thought I'd touch. And that discovery would change the balance of power forever. What he thought was his. There's something dangerous about comfort. It makes people careless. By the third week, my husband had grown relaxed again. Relaxed in the way men do when they believe nothing is changing. He laughed more. He hummed while shaving. He even brought me flowers one evening, as if a gesture could rewrite truth. I thanked him. I placed them in water. And I kept watching. One afternoon, while he was at work, I sat in the study with the old computer he thought was broken. He had never bothered to throw it away. Why would he? He didn't think I remembered passwords. But I remembered everything. I didn't dig through messages. I didn't read love notes. That wasn't necessary. I looked at numbers. Accounts he assumed were solely his. Investments I had originally funded decades ago. Properties listed under companies I helped establish, but had quietly stepped away from when the children were small. I felt no shock. Only clarity. The truth was simple and deeply ironic. The life he was planning with her, the trips, the security, the confidence, rested on foundations he believed I no longer understood. Or owned. I printed nothing. Saved nothing. I wrote everything down by hand. Later that week, I ran into her. By accident, of course. She stood near the cafe window, sunlight catching her hair, confidence spilling from the way she laughed too loudly. She noticed me and smiled, not warmly, but politely, the way women smile when they believe they've already won. "You must be his wife," she said. I nodded. Yes. She hesitated, then extended her hand. I'm glad to finally meet you. Her grip was firm, her eyes assessing. I studied her calmly, not with jealousy, but with curiosity. She wasn't cruel. She wasn't special. She was uninformed. He talks about you with such respect, she added carefully. I smiled. He always did. That was when something flickered across her face. Uncertainty. I excused myself and walked away before she could recover. Not to intimidate her, but to let her sit with the idea that I was not broken. At home that night, my husband mentioned her name casually. She's good at her job, he said. Smart. I nodded while folding laundry. She must be. He watched me closely, waiting for something. I gave him nothing. Because the truth is, once you see someone clearly, they lose power over you. The following day, I visited a lawyer. Not a dramatic one. A calm one. A woman who listened without interrupting, without judgment, without rushing me. When I finished, she leaned back in her chair. You're not asking for revenge, she said. You're asking for restoration. Yes, I replied. And timing. She smiled knowingly. Then wait. That evening, I looked at my husband across the dinner table and realized something quietly profound. He thought he was living two lives. But in reality, he was standing on one. And I was holding the ground beneath his feet. I didn't expose him. I didn't warn her. I let them keep building their dream on something that was never truly theirs. The day the air changed. Some truths don't arrive loudly. They slip into a room and rearrange the air. That morning, my husband woke up unusually cheerful. He shaved twice, once because he missed a spot, the second time because he was nervous and didn't know why. He kissed my cheek before leaving, something he hadn't done in months. You okay? I asked gently. Just busy, he replied. Busy. Yes. He was. By noon, his phone began to vibrate on the kitchen counter where he had forgotten it. I didn't touch it. I didn't need to. I already knew what today was. The lawyer called at exactly 12:17 p.m. It's done, she said, quietly. Exactly as requested. I thanked her and ended the call. Then I sat at the table for a long time, my hands folded, breathing slowly. Power doesn't feel like fireworks. It feels like stillness. That evening, my husband came home late, later than usual. His confidence had softened around the edges. He moved through the house differently, as if something had followed him inside. We ate dinner in silence. Halfway through, he cleared his throat. I had a strange day, he said. I looked up. Oh. There was confusion at work. Accounts temporarily frozen. Some paperwork questions. I nodded slowly. That happens sometimes. He studied me. You wouldn't know anything about that, would you? I met his eyes calmly. No. That wasn't a lie. I didn't know. I understood. Later that night, he paced the bedroom, phone pressed to his ear, voice low and sharp. No, it doesn't make sense. Everything was fine yesterday. I told you it was secure. Yes, I'm sure. He stopped mid-sentence when he noticed me watching. Go to sleep, he said quickly. I am, I replied, lying down. But sleep did not come easily for him. The next morning, he didn't leave for work. Instead, he sat at the kitchen table staring at nothing. They're saying I don't have sole authority anymore, he finally said. That some ownership was reactivated. I poured tea carefully. That must be unsettling. He laughed nervously. It's probably a mistake. I sipped my tea. Mistakes tend to surface eventually. He looked at me then, really looked, as if seeing me for the first time in years. What are you saying? I placed the cup down gently. I'm saying that time has a way of remembering who built what. That afternoon, she called. Not him. Me. I think we should talk, she said, voice strained. I agreed. We met in the same cafe. She looked different now, polished still, but shaken underneath. Her confidence had cracks. He told me you were passive, she said carefully, that you didn't involve yourself in finances. I smiled faintly. He always underestimated quiet people. Her voice trembled. Is it true? About the ownership? About the investments? Yes, I said calmly. She swallowed. Why didn't you say anything? I leaned forward slightly. Because I wanted to see what kind of person you would be when the illusion disappeared. She had no answer. Neither did my husband that night when he came home furious, desperate, afraid. You did this, he accused. I nodded. Yes. He sank into a chair. Why now? I thought for a moment. Because now you understand what it feels like to live in a house where nothing truly belongs to you. Silence filled the room. And for the first time, he had no place to stand. I hadn't destroyed him. I had simply stopped holding him up. And the next day, the truth would no longer be private. When the truth finally stood up. There's a moment when lies stop running. They don't collapse all at once. They stand still, exposed, unsure which direction to escape. That was my husband the morning after everything changed. He sat at the edge of the bed, tie in his hands, staring at the floor like it might offer him answers. For years, he had walked through life convinced the ground beneath him was solid, because he believed I was holding it steady. That illusion was gone. I don't understand how you planned all this without me noticing, he said quietly. I buttoned my coat, calm as always. Because you stopped noticing me a long time ago. He flinched, not from anger, but recognition. At work that day, the consequences became public. Emails, meetings, lawyers. Names he didn't expect to see suddenly appeared on documents he thought were untouchable. Mine. Not loudly. Not dramatically. Just there. The board requested clarification. Investors asked questions. The company's legal counsel confirmed what had always been true but conveniently forgotten. I was not the wife who stayed home. I was the foundation. When he came home that evening, he looked smaller. Not physically, internally. The confidence that once filled rooms ahead of him had drained away. She knows, he said. I nodded. I know. No, he whispered. She knows you. I sat across from him. And how does that feel? He swallowed hard. Like I've been living someone else's life. That night, he didn't touch his phone. The next morning, she came to the house. She stood at the doorway like a guest who knew she was no longer welcome anywhere. I didn't know, she said softly. I believed her, partly. But ignorance doesn't erase participation. You knew enough, I replied gently. She looked past me, at the home she thought symbolized victory. He told me you were invisible, she said. I smiled sadly. That's what people say when they can't afford to look closely. She left without another word. By the end of the week, my husband's world had quietly inverted. Meetings he once led, he now attended. Decisions he once made alone now required approval. And the house, the one he had bragged about, no longer felt like his. One evening, he asked the question he had been avoiding. Do you want a divorce? I thought carefully before answering. I want honesty, I said. For the first time in years. He nodded slowly. I was wrong, he admitted. About you. About myself. I met his eyes. I know. We didn't raise our voices. We didn't throw accusations. Because when truth finally arrives, it doesn't need volume. It needs space. That night, I slept peacefully for the first time in months. Not because I had won, but because I no longer carried what wasn't mine to carry. I thought this was where the story ended. But the final reckoning wasn't about money. It was about choice. What I chose to keep. Some endings arrive with slammed doors. Others arrive quietly, Like a cup of tea cooling beside you while the house finally goes still. This was the quiet kind. Weeks passed after the truth surfaced. Not dramatic weeks. No shouting, no lawyers fighting on the front lawn. Just space. Space where noise used to live. Space where I could hear myself think again. My husband moved into the guest room. At first, he tried to speak, apologies wrapped in explanations, regrets tangled with excuses. I listened. But I didn't absorb them. Because understanding someone doesn't mean accepting what they did. One evening, he said something that surprised me. "I don't think I ever really saw you," he admitted. "I saw what you gave. I saw what you fixed. I saw what you made easier. But I never saw you." I looked at him for a long moment. "That," I said softly, "is the loneliest kind of marriage." He nodded, eyes wet. "I don't expect forgiveness." "That's good," I replied. "Because forgiveness isn't owed. It's earned, sometimes over years, sometimes never." We sat there, two people finally speaking without masks. And that was when I understood something important. Revenge had never been my goal. Freedom was. A week later, I made my decision. I didn't leave in anger. I didn't stay out of fear. I chose peace. The legal papers were signed calmly, fairly, quietly. He kept what he worked for. I kept what I built. And more importantly, I kept myself. On my last morning in that house, I walked through each room slowly, not with bitterness, but with gratitude. This was where I had raised dreams that weren't always respected. This was where I had been underestimated. This was where I learned the cost of silence. I packed lightly, because when you stop carrying emotional weight, you realize how little you actually need. I moved into a smaller place near the water. A place with big windows and early light. A place where mornings felt like invitations, not obligations. I started volunteering again, something I had quietly let go of over the years. I reconnected with friends I had unintentionally abandoned. And most importantly, I began speaking. Not loudly, but truthfully. One afternoon, a woman approached me after a community meeting. "You remind me of myself," she said. "Always holding everything together. Always being patient." I smiled gently. "Just make sure you don't disappear while doing it." She nodded, eyes shining. That's when I realized, stories don't end when marriages do. They end when women forget who they are. My husband and I speak occasionally now. Respectfully. Carefully. He's learning. I've already learned. And the woman he once thought would never find out? She didn't take revenge. She reclaimed her voice. If you're listening to this and feeling invisible, if you've been told you're too quiet, too old, too forgiving, or too replaceable, let me tell you something clearly. You don't need to be loud to be powerful. You don't need anger to demand respect. And you don't need to prove your worth to anyone who benefits from doubting it. Sometimes the strongest move isn't confrontation. It's clarity. If this story touched you, if you've ever been underestimated, overlooked, or quietly betrayed, comment below. Where are you watching from? Like this story to support voices that tell the truth. Subscribe for more real-life stories about strength, dignity, and quiet power. Because the most dangerous woman in the room is the one who finally remembers who she is.